Hide and seek used to be my favorite game to play with my neighborhood friends growing up. We would spend hours and hours devising the very best hiding spots all around our respective houses, and eventually around the whole neighborhood. One time, as I was scrambling to find a new hiding spot in my house before the assigned seeker had finished counting, I realized that all my usual hiding places felt like old news. Behind the curtains, under my sister's bed, in the cabinet under the sink, they all suddenly seemed like mediocre hiding spots, and I didn't want to be mediocre. So I'm panicking because the seeker is so close to finishing his counting, and I'm still right in the open, standing in the living room. At the last moment, I notice the door to the garage is open when it's usually supposed to be closed, and while it had never been strictly off limits, hardly any of us ever hid in there, on account of my dad saying it wasn't a playground. I slip into the garage just as the seeker yells, "Ready or not, here I come," and I haven't hid yet. I'm just kind of standing in the middle of the garage, looking around to see places where I can hide. I spot the chest freezer humming idly in the back corner of the room, and I run towards it as quietly as I can and climb inside. Inside the freezer, the world is deadly cold and pitch black. After several minutes and hearing my friends scream as they're found, I hear the seeker turn the doorknob and step into the garage. He paces from one side of the room to the other. I can imagine his eyes scanning every inch of the wall space. He opens the cabinets in which my mom keeps the linen and spare towels. No one there. I hear him taunt his prey, yelling, "I'll find you," in a sing-songy voice. But eventually, I hear the seeker leave the room again and his footsteps pattering elsewhere. I breathe a sigh of relief. At this point, I'm getting cold, but I hang on a few more minutes in case the seeker returns or is listening at the door for me to emerge. I remember how, for a moment, I worried that the seeker had merely pretended to leave the room, as that's the kind of thing I would have done. After enough time had passed without any signs of the seeker returning to the room, I pushed the chest freezer's icy lid up. No movement. I tried again, pressing my entire body weight against the lid, even managing to plant my feet firmly on the bottom of the box and using my knees to push the lid upwards. Nothing again. At this point, my mind is fully racing, my imagination providing details of all the ways I would die. Would I freeze? Would I suffocate? Keep in mind also that I'm only something like 8 years old at this point, which means my imagination is wild and my strength sorely underdeveloped. I start to yell, "I'm here! Help me! I'm trapped!" But the echo of my cries went unheard. I shiver and feel tingling all over my arms, legs, and neck as I begin pounding at all the sides of the freezer. I bet they were bright red at that point, but the thing is that in the pitch darkness of a closed freezer, there's absolutely no way to tell. It felt like I was trapped for hours. Periodically, I banged on the walls and tried to rock the entire structure, but it's no use. My mind eventually lulls, and I close my eyes, fully certain that I am about to die. I wake up in an ambulance stretcher, with a mask over my face feeding me oxygen and a mass of blankets covering my body as paramedics take me off to the hospital. To this day, I have nightmares in which I'm locked in a cold, minuscule room, and it's safe to say I panic in confined spaces. I know that if my father hadn't come home and found me when he did, I probably wouldn't be here to share my story. Growing up with two parents that focused more on their careers than they did me and my sister Mia, this meant that every summer, we had to go and stay at our grandma and grandpa's house in the middle of nowhere. There was very little to do, and as much as we loved our grandparents, 6 weeks with nothing to do was nothing to look forward to. We would take our N64 and play Mario Kart until it wasn't fun anymore. We would sometimes go exploring, but would get into trouble if we strayed too far. One year when I was 13 and my sister was 11, we were out playing in the fields at the back of our grandparents' house when we heard a loud exploding sound. It sounded like firecrackers or fireworks going off in the woods, but in all the years we had stayed there, we never saw anyone close to our grandparents' house, as it was miles away from anywhere. Curious as to what the noise was, me and Mia ran down to find 3 boys, all about our age, lighting firecrackers and throwing them into the air. They seemed excited to see us and introduced themselves. Their names were John, Ben, and Kevin, who insisted we call him Hyro. I was thinking that now we had some new friends to play with, maybe this summer wouldn't be so boring. For the next 2 weeks, we played out almost every day. We would go exploring together, play soccer, and even go hang out in Hyro's treehouse. While we were playing one day, Ben said that he knew of an old abandoned house that looked really creepy and asked if we all wanted to sneak out and go and explore. "It'll be much creepier at night," Ben said. I was up for it, and Mia said she would be too. I didn't really want Mia coming with us as I didn't want to be responsible for her. I knew she would be a scaredy cat and start to moan and cry as soon as we got there, so once we were back at our grandparents', I told her she wasn't allowed to come. Mia protested and said she would tell if I didn't let her come with us, so I had no choice but to let her tag along. I was angry and frustrated with her, but I didn't want to even risk her telling our grandparents. I knew they wouldn't let me out for the rest of the summer if they found out I left the house in the middle of the night. We all met in the woods at the bottom of the fields, and Ben said he would lead the way. I marched off ahead with Ben, and Mia stayed back with Hyro and John. We were talking, and I apologized to Ben for my sister coming along. "It's okay. I have an idea if you want to lose her." Ben suggested that once we've explored the creepy house, we can play hide and seek, and when everyone goes to hide, we can leave her there and go explore somewhere else. I know as a big brother, I should have been against leaving my sister in an abandoned house on her own in the middle of the night, but I was only 13 and was angry at her for threatening to tell on me. We got to the abandoned house, and as we walked around, Ben told us some stories that he had heard about the house. Apparently, it was haunted, and the ghost of a little girl lingered there after being murdered by an intruder when she was only 6 years old. We had these kinds of ghost stories back home, and most of which were bullshit. The time came to play hide and seek so I could ditch my little sister, and I said I would count first, and everyone ran off to hide. I ran tiptoe out of the back door, where we all met up outside as previously agreed, and started to run through the long grass at the back of the house and into the darkness. Then, my heart sank as I heard Mia scream, closely followed by a gunshot. This wasn't an "I'm afraid of the dark" scream. This was a "I'm scared for my life" scream. I started running as fast as I could back to the house, Ben, John, and Hyro following close behind. I was shaking, and every thought imaginable was going through my head. When we got to the house, we couldn't find Mia. We searched everywhere, and she was nowhere. We found a trail of blood that led out through the front door. I have never been so scared in my life. We tried to follow the blood, but we lost it in the dark. I didn't know what to do, and after looking around the area for close to an hour, I knew I had to go home and tell my grandparents. Ben, John, and Hyro all came with me, and when we arrived back at my grandparents' house, Mia was sitting there with both my grandparents and a man I soon learned to be one of the neighbors. She was still sobbing and sniffling and looking at me like she hated me, and quite understandably. When we all ran out of the back door and into the grass behind the house, a large dog or wolf of some kind had come in through the front door. Mia said it growled and snarled at her, but before it could attack, Mr. Bosley shot at it and it ran off. We don't know if the dog survived, but we do know it was hit due to the blood trailing out of the front door of the house. The question no one asked, and I didn't realize until years later, is, what was Mr. Bosley doing at the house? I'm 15 years old, and this only happened last summer. Me and my friends meet up every Saturday and play games out in the street. There's about 10 of us all together, and more often than not, we play hide and seek late into the night. We have boundaries where you can and can't go in order to make the game fair. There's a small ravine near our house, and the boundaries end before you get too close. This is to make sure that someone doesn't run blindly, trying not to get caught and fall in. I was hiding, and my friend Sid was seeking. As I was running off to hide, I saw Sid cheating. He looked at me under his arm as he stood facing the tree, counting. I hate cheaters, and knew that Sid would come looking for me first. To try and trick him, I went out of bounds with the thought that I would sneak along the top of the ravine and come further down and back into the boundary line and hide somewhere else. I was making my way along the edge, which drops down a few feet before the steep drop. I looked around to check how close to the edge I was when I saw a woman on the other side of the ravine standing, looking up at me. She was wearing an all-white dress, like a nightgown my mom wears. I waved at her, and she waved back. I wanted to shout and ask her if she was okay, but I didn't want to give myself away, as Sid was surely coming to find me by now. I continued to climb along the edge, and when I looked back around, the woman was gone. There was no way that the woman could have left and climbed out of sight in the time I had my back turned. I wasn't even sure how she got down there. I continued to move along, being careful of my steps, while constantly looking to see if I could see the woman in white. I didn't see her again. When I got home, I told my dad about the woman I saw there, thinking maybe someone needed to go and look for her, but my dad didn't seem concerned. He told me that a woman died there in the middle of the night many years ago. Apparently, she was sleepwalking and fell into the ravine and is now stuck down there. I'd never heard this story before, and I don't know if he was just telling me this to scare me, but it worked. No one else I've asked knows about this woman my dad told me about, but I know I definitely saw a woman down there, and I know there's no way that if she was a real person, she could have left without me seeing her.